So, Mike, I'm gonna let you take the floor to introduce our guest this evening. You're going to be taking the spot of myself or Caroline. You're going to be introducing our amazing guest tonight. So, I will let you take that on, Mike.
Thank you very much for entrusting me. I am accompanied by my cat, so apologies if this is interrupted by any noises. So, we're very lucky, and I'm really happy again to be able to witness or be part of another presentation by Andy Guy, who's been researching the paranormal for 35 years, and that's definitely a good qualification in itself. But more than that, actively conducting field observations since 2011 with a team called Southern Ghost Society. With an initial electrical engineering background working for a large computer manufacturer and subsequent career change to project management, Andy has developed a wide range of technical skills to support his research programs into the environmental impact of supernatural events. Using results from data logging, the environment and investigation variables, Andy now designs and produces equipment through the trading name SCIRE. I hope I got that right. I've got the guide.
Close enough.
That's good, Andy. Thank you. I've been practicing for half an hour, but it's good to the trading name SCIRE, with a goal to sharing his findings with as much of the paranormal community as possible to help develop further insights and discoveries. So again, that's what Andy will be doing now. So thank you very much, Andy, and over to you.
Is about a house you may have heard of. You might have been to it. It's a nice place to visit as a museum. You might have even conducted years of investigations there. But even those who care for the listed building do not fully understand the many passions and decisions and violence and random acts and catastrophes and spiritual turbulence which have resulted in one of the most paranormally active buildings in the UK. I'm quite comfortable saying that because I've got the data to back it up. It's not a cozy house, and it's not a house which gives you a feeling of welcome when you go into it, and it's not even a house that was fully built at all. It's not had a grand family living there, yet people for many years have reported full-bodied apparitions, often multiple witnesses, any numbers of noises and bangs and smashes and screams. So how can this be? How can this mostly empty, unbuilt house have this amount of activity in it? So I'm going to walk through the long history of the building and try to place in context the many reported ghosts, which people are still reporting to this day, and sprinkle in some unreleased footage of paranormal events which might support some of these stories. So I'm trying to make it not so dry. This is the story of Woodchester Mansion. Right, so let's start off with where it is, in case you've not been there. It's an unfinished Gothic building. It's revival era, so Victorian, and it's located in Nymphsfield in Gloucestershire. As you can see from this graphic, and if you've been there, the Cotswolds can be a very dense area with woods and hills. You can drive for miles and not see people, but nowhere is quite secluded as the valley that Woodchester Mansion's built in. As you can see from me using the Google Maps here, you see the valley itself is built into a mesa of land that rise above the nearby villages and towns. And then the valley plunges deep into that mesa, and that gives a really perfect spot for a getaway house that's well clear of any neighbours or any people who happen to wander there. So it's a very private location, which is also quite wet and damp, and things grow like crazy down there, so it's not the easiest place to live. But that seclusion and that sort of special place vibe that it has probably explains the extensive history of occupation in the area, from pre-Roman times all the way until sort of today. Right, so I'd like to go through that history and then start to see in context what's going on. So 5,000 years ago, so I'm starting way back, the Neolithic people of the Woodchester area, it wasn't called that then, they built a number of barrows and inhabited the heavily wooded Nailsworth Valley all the way up until the invasion of the Romans. Those barrows are dug into the hillsides and were generally a focus of their spiritual beliefs and where they buried their loved ones, and it indicates that there were settlements in the area. And it could be from these prehistoric times that stories of elemental beings were first told around the campfires, or whilst building these stone monuments into the hills. Probably, or perhaps, digging these sacred places in the side of the valley gave some form to the collective spiritualist beliefs of the people who worshipped there and revered the land. And that could explain the small Gollum-like figure which has been seen in the cellar of the current day Woodchester Mansion. And unusually, it's also been seen doing somersaults along the driveway, which must be quite a thing to see. I'd certainly make a note of that one. The entity has been reported as wearing rags and very dishevelled, often hiding in corners in the cellar and looking round corners, but tends to mostly be witnessed and reported in the vaulted room at the far end. Unknown reason. Fortunately, don't have any footage of that. I've wanted to for a while, but no luck yet. Can but try. Moving on, a Roman mosaic was found under the ruins of a Norman church, which is inside the current graveyard of St. Mary's in Woodchester. And that discovery of the church parts being Roman, you can see in the picture in the bottom left, just up there, that red piece of roofing on the end of the church is actually Roman tile, and some of the bricks have been reused, so it gave some clues to local historical societies, and they discovered a massive Roman villa there. The remains of the villa were pockmarked by the digging of Christian graves in later years, but what remains, and is still there to this day marked with a stone, are fantastic examples of how much respect that the inhabitants had for their homes. The mosaics themselves had lots of local animals in there, so the people who lived there appreciated the land and they wanted to depict it inside the decorations of their houses. In fact, the name for Woodchester actually comes from the Roman, and I'm going to mispronounce this because my Latin's very rusty, Ruduchester. See? Terrible. But that means Roman camp in the wood. There's also a spring in the valley, which would very much likely have been a focus during the Roman era. Natural springs were often used as places of worship or sacrifice, where people would go to a spring and break something of value, a brooch or sword or anything which meant that they were giving something up, and in return for some sort of succor from the local energies, minor deities, or perhaps even that elemental. Maybe that's where the elemental kept on feeding on that energy that was provided to it in the forms of dedications and sacrifices. It's a very common part of Fey lore that to keep elemental happy, you need to leave out things for them. Some way of saying, you're welcome here, please stay, have this bowl of porridge. There is a interesting claim, though, from this time, It could be that this focus on the land and this dedication to preserving it could explain why that people have cited a Roman soldier patrolling the park. However, that claim I couldn't trace back to an original source, so we have to take that almost as a folklore piece, but interesting nonetheless. Okay, after the Romans left the British Isles, the Saxons settled in Woodchester in apparently 577 AD, so it's very specific. I think it was a Tuesday. And a much smaller population maintained the estate. So apparently there was only 29 people living there in the 1066 Domesday Book. It was listed as a manor estate, and it predominantly farmed the lumber from the area and maintained that usage and that level of activity all the way until 1564, when a gentleman called George Huntley repurposed the valley into a deer park. I propose that this secluded valley from the general populace and made it private. So whereas before it was part of the local community and village, the valley now was shut off to them. People weren't allowed to go in there and grab deer or wood anymore. George Huntley's grandson, whose name was also George, he built a hunting lodge in the park, which is the first recorded piece of information which leads to a building of any size actually being inside the valley itself. Interestingly, near to the gates of the estate, a terrifying visage of a leather-mailed warrior riding his horse can be seen bolting through the countryside. In fact, in 1902, a local vicar saw this strange apparition at the gates to the mansion and never returned to the building again. This phantom horseman is likely linked to the medieval era based on the description of his clothing, though his possible identity and where he is in such a hurry to get to will likely never be known. And as you can see from the map, the name Woodchester is slowly developing. It's now Woodchester. Okay, the Ducci family, they got involved after the Huntleys had built this lodge, but they put so much money into it, and perhaps because it's quite a difficult area to build in. You have to take all the materials down to where they built their lodge, and they probably had to maintain it quite a lot because it was a wooden lodge and it's a wet area, so they were probably constantly fixing it. And it bankrupted them, which led to the sale of the park to the Ducci family in 1631. Sir Robert Ducci, Lord Mayor of London and banker to Charles I, he kept the estate as a recreational park for his family, who subsequently built their own replacement building there for Huntley's lodge, and they called it Spring Park. This was a much, much bigger affair in stone. And interestingly as well, the Georgian mansion has almost exactly the same footprint as the current Woodchester mansion. And if you've been there, you'll probably note that the kitchen in the current mansion is very worn. The flagstones are worn, the stairs up to them are worn, and that's because that material came from Spring Park. I'd imagine that the Ducci family were trying to save a bit of money and didn't want to spend more money on the servants, so they just reused what was there. The Ducci family marked the longest recorded family ownership and habitation within the valley, which I think is why a good number of the reported ghost sightings can likely be attributed to this period, rather than the later period and the owners that mostly get focused on. This includes a lot of different horsemen and even a phantom coach. But there are a couple of very interesting claims, which I'm going to drill a little bit into. But before I move on, I just want to point out the photograph on the far right is a last remaining Ducci family member who came back to the Woodchester Mansion and signed the guest book, which I think is lovely. Return back to the family home, kinda. Okay, Gloucestershire, in general, saw a great deal of conflict during the Civil War, and particularly during the Siege of Gloucester, where parliamentarian forces successfully defended the city against royalist troops. The region was strategically important due to the control of vital supplies and ports, leading to fierce battles and shifting allegiances between the royalists and parliamentarians. Now, during this time, Sir Richard Ducci Morton owned Spring Park and supported royalists during this period. Probably because his dad was banker to Charles I, who managed to get away without losing his head. Only lost a bit of money, but still kind of made it back quite well. So didn't lose out too much in the changeover for the period. Now, the reason I bring this up is that it's been reported that a ghost in Civil War clothing has been seen in the valley riding towards the house. However, in the accounts I've found, it doesn't mention whether it was a roundhead or cavalier. But I'd imagine it'd be unlikely for one of Oliver Cromwell's forces to be welcome in the house. So unless he was attacking the place, then it would probably be some form of cavalier running towards the house. Right. Another interesting story, which I've focused on a few times while investigating and using as a form of calling out and trying to gain a bit of information while we're there, is also tied in for what I believe to be a completely false claim. Because according to, let's say, legend, Sir Rupert de Lassagne, or Lassagne, inherited Spring Park after killing his cousin and then went on to own the estate. This event is tied to locales which are reportedly seen headless horsemen, and they're believed to be Sir Rupert, particularly near the lakes. Now, the lineage of the Ducci family over their 234 years of owning the property is very well documented. You can go on peerage.com and you can track it through, exactly which children married which other people and then where they lived. And it's a great source of information. I got those previous photos from there, in fact. So it was a good place to go if you're looking at big houses, because you can then find out exactly who was there and what happened to them and where did the other people who moved there come from. It's good. Now, the problem is that not one of those people that I trawled through while building a family tree was called Rupert, which it could have been a nickname, but there's also no record of a Lassagne family at all in the peerage record. And based on the name de Lassagne, meaning of Lassagne, there is no place with that name. So it's very hard to tie that specific name, which is used again and again in a lot of ghost books, to an individual or a location that they could have come from. And if he'd taken over owning Spring Park, then that would have broken that chain of the Ducci family, which is also very unlikely. So I believe that this could be a story that develops into an urban legend, and it could be a dramatization of a duel that occurred at Spring Park in 1776, where a naval gentleman and a tradesman duelled after the tradesman took affront at the gentleman taking some familiarities with his spouse. And as the paper says, that they at 10 yards both fired, and then the cuckolded husband was shot through the head, and the gentleman was wounded in the groin, which I thought was kind of funny because it's almost poetic justice considering it was that area that got him into trouble in the first place. It's unlikely he survived and probably died a horrible groiny death. The headless aspect of the ghostly ride around the lake could be tied and related to that husband's fatal head wound, perhaps. Another really interesting one, which I've kind of just been delving into recently, is that in 2002, there was an investigation planned by a production company from America for a TV show called The Scariest Places on Earth. Scariest Places on Earth. And they were there to recon the building. Now, I've watched that show that they filmed there, and I can't recommend it. I wouldn't say it was very scientific, but it did involve a lot of snakes. So they did carry a lot of snakes around. So if you want a bit of a giggle, then maybe check it out. Now, in support of this production crew, members of the Ghost Club drove to the mansion, and as they were going down the driveway, saw in a window above the front door a woman, and the description I've taken from an article on the ASSAP website, was in a clean linen dress with a low scoop neckline, and she had short shoulder-length hair and brushed back from her face. While I was researching Woodchester, one of the times I've been, I came across a video on YouTube by a channel called Raven's Retreat. And they were shooting a daytime just visit to the mansion with the other museum visitors, and did a little introduction in front of the house. And as you can see in the top video, one of the presenters turns around, points out a window and says that they had spotted a woman. And the camera then zoomed into the window, which is literally above the door. Now, neither occurrence could have been someone standing at the window, as when you go in there, as people who've gone there know, there's no floors in some of these floors. Some of the windows will just go out into a drop down to the ground floor. It wasn't completed at any point, so there could be no one at the current mansion who is standing by that window. If there was someone standing by that window and it was a revenant of a previous personality was there, or some form of visual recording in material of the land, or even some sort of psychic bridge between the person standing on the driveway and that person being by the window, they would have had to come from Spring Park, because no one from the current Woodchester Mansion would have ever been able to stand there. And the interesting point as well, recently, while researching the Ducci family, and I was finding some photos and pictures of the different family members, I came across this one. Is it just me, or does Francis Morton bear a striking resemblance to the Ghost Club description? Now, there could have been some points of influence from these two things. The YouTubers could have heard this story about the American crew recording, and the Ghost Club people could have seen this picture. But still, it's kind of tantalizing to think they might have got the name of the person, and next time I go back, I'm certainly going to be using it, just to see if it possibly is that. And apart from that particular location, a lady in a white dress has been reported in several places around the building. Is this also maybe Frances? Frances herself was the daughter of Henry Herbert, and then married Thomas Reynolds Morton, who was the first Earl of Ducci, so was very much an important person in the family. And hopefully we speak to her next time we're there. Okay. Now, these are the people who mostly get focused on. Here we go, because it was a Lee family who built Woodchester Mansion, but their story is quite an interesting one. William Lee was a wealthy Catholic convert who was born in Liverpool, and his father, who was also called William Lee. It was a very popular name in the family. They're all Williams. He was a merchant who traded principally in groceries, Cheshire salt and tobacco, and was fairly wealthy. He managed to buy a few different places, a place called Roby Hill Estate on the outskirts of Liverpool, and a townhouse in Liverpool as well. And when he retired in 1812, he stepped back from the business, and his son William took over, and finally died 3 years later, and left a healthy sum of money to his son, £10,000 in Liverpool itself, the estates, and 100 grand in London banks. So that equates to 10 plus million pounds now in money. So that's a good amount to inherit and use. And William took on that money, and at that point he was aged 13, and he did what anyone who's 13 would do, is start just following his whims. So he travelled around in Europe with his mum for a few years before marrying Caroline Cotterill. And according to records, he must have then sold some of the properties, correlating all the money and sort of pulling away from Liverpool. So he'd taken on another property called Aston Hall in Staffordshire. They had a son called William, who they called Willie because the place was chock full of Williams and no Willies. So that's the way they went. And they had a daughter, which they also called Caroline, after her mum. They weren't very imaginative, I don't think. So they went with the second daughter, we called Beatrice, because they couldn't call her Caroline or Willie. And afterwards had no more children. Now in the 30s, there was a movement of revived Catholic interest called the Oxford movement, and William Lee got very interested in that. And what he took from it was the country didn't like Catholics much at that time. You weren't allowed to do a lot of things and hold office and go into non-Catholic churches probably. But what he wanted to do was take all this money, dissolve all these properties, close all these businesses, and build a Catholic haven. So he looked around the country and found a new estate which he could develop it in. And one of the advantages of Woodchester was that there was no Catholic church within a good few miles, good 100 miles from Bury. And he thought, this is great. I can make my mark here. I can make this our Catholic theme park. So went to Woodchester and settled into a small house called the Cottage, which is a gardener's house on the estate, but it's actually got loads of rooms, and I think it's still there when you drive past when you come in. He then started building, putting together plans for a church inside the village and schools. And if you go there on investigation, if you go early and then go around Nympsfield, you can spot all these Lee buildings around the place still. He's still very much a part of that community, which is fascinating. There's a cross right in the middle of the village next to the pub, which was erected by Beatrice, which is still there. Okay, so these are the guys who were building the mansion. So in 1858, they started constructing it. And a lot of it, as from the kitchen, was taken from Spring Park. And slowly that got taken down, and by 1866, all the remaining Spring Park stuff they didn't want to keep, they auctioned it off, probably to help pay for this mansion and all the things in the village they were building. Now, there's a few urban legends here as well, which I'm not fuel too much, but they one of the things about Woodchester Mansion, when people go there, they hear the story of the tools that were left lying around the building, how the workmen must have been scared off by something, and that's why they then never came back and picked them up. But the real reason is of the mansion not being finished is that William Lee died, and it cost an absolute fortune, and all the money that he'd been inherited and all the properties had been blown on building this dream of his. And his children weren't too happy to continue it. So there was another urban legend / actual thing that happened in there, which is there was sounds of people screaming and falling. In fact, in 2001, as a film crew spent a night in the building, reported these disembodied bangs. They were coming from the sound side of the fireplace, and they apparently get louder and louder and louder, and they sounded like a steam train was being charged through the house. And members of the Ghost Club ran outside the room. So this was in the front room, which actually has been partly built. And they worked out that the sounded like it was coming from the first floor corridor. So they went up there, and in going up the stairs, saw masonry falling from the ceiling, or shadows or darkness. So they all legged it because they thought they were going to get crushed. And these loud banging noises were the mansion falling down. And once they'd got to a safe distance, looked back, and there was nothing there. There was no masonry falling at all. The sound of it was just the sound of it, or that visual was maybe some sort of reflection back to an event that occurred. There are unsubstantiated reports, I can't find anything in the newspapers about it, where workmen died falling off a ladder. This isn't actual footage, but could it have been that event which the stone banging was people working on the stonework, and then something happened, it collapsed, and then people died? But the problem is, it's just an urban legend without any sort of evidence. Another very interesting claim, which sounds like an urban legend, but also does tie in to things which happened. Part of what William Lee did was he built a magnificent chapel, which is massively outsized considering the size of the house, and started bringing monks in and set up a monastery. That sounds better. Who then came and used the chapel and dedicated the chapel, and they would come back and forwards. But there was an accident where Brother Bristow and some of his young monk mates were walking to the park and decided, because it was a warm day, to go for a swim in the lake. And according to the newspaper story, one of them couldn't swim, but they thought, well, it's only a lake, we'll help you. But they didn't, and not only did he not survive his swim, he drowned while swimming. He sank to the bottom, and they couldn't get to him. So he was down there a while, after which they did retrieve him. But one of the claims that is seen is that there's a coffin hovering above the lake. Could this be linked to the fact that there was a monk that sank and drowned and was stuck at the bottom and felt like that's where his last resting place was going to be and was unhappy with that? And we're seeing a manifestation of an interpretation of his fears at that point. There's also been a monk seen around the grounds as well. And in fact, a video was captured and shown on the program Great British Ghosts, where Chris Howley recants this story of where people saw and videoed a monk moving inside the chapel. So one thing I wanted to try as an experiment is recreating it. So a Singapore experiment-like situation. If we went to the chapel and dressed up like a monk and then walked in the same place as this video, we could then see if A, could that figure that was seen in the video actually be a cowled figure, and B, would do an experiment of dressing like a monk and playing some monkey music. No, monkey music's not right. Monk music, chants, hymns. Yeah, we'll go with that. Would that trigger any sort of reactions? So what we have here is a little video. So I'm just going to play that so you can see what happened. Nothing happened, which is a shame. But the good bit was that's me standing there in the doorway, and I'm 6'3", slightly tall in heels, and as I walk past the doorway, I'm much higher up that doorway than the figure that's in the video. The video figure, when you match it up against where I am, is chest height. If that figure was a hooded monk, then he was 4.5 feet, 5 tops. So if it's a recording of a monk, maybe there's some sort of perspective thing which occurs over time. Who can say? It was an interesting experiment though. And beyond nothing happening that particular point in the night, I went down to the cellar again to do some more investigation, still monked up. And that was a very active investigation. So it did work, just not in the right place, which is very typical. Okay, so after William Lee died, they stopped all work in the mansion, and these are the tools which were found in the building, and then brought up that legend that the workers all ran out screaming. But when you look at the number of tools themselves, it isn't a huge number, and they could have been actually owned by the Lees at that point. So it's very likely that the workmen took the tools that were theirs or that they wanted, and these were just forgotten or left, as opposed to they left everything behind and ran away. Because it didn't. One day they came to work and their foreman said, sorry, there's no more money, and then they all went home again. However, the house was still there and the Lee family still owned it, and they had to do something with the mansion. And the initial plan that William Lee had was, after it was built and his family living there, they would gift the mansion to the church and make it a full-blown monastery at the centre of the Catholic area. The problem is the church didn't want it. So Willie got in touch with the Cardinal Vaughan and invited him to see the mansion and hopefully take it on. And that didn't work. They weren't very interested in it. And then William Lee's niece, Mary Blanche Lee, eventually sold or tried to sell, the mansion to the trustees of the Barnwood Hospital with the idea of trying to turn it into a mental hospital. But the problem was that their mental hospital weren't very keen on the location. It wasn't very secure. They were concerned about all the lakes and people would fall in them or drown in them while they're swimming. So they also had to go to the expense of draining one of the lakes. But the hospital didn't decide that they wanted to go ahead with it. So they were stuck with it. That was until World War II, where the Americans wanted to use it as a location to do training because of it being secluded and in some middle of some woods, and they could control the information in the local area. Perfect place to do some training. And all those giant lakes were great for practicing the boarding and disembarking for the D-Day landings. And it was in fact one of these times that there was an accident, and they were trying to disembark a tank and some artillery from flotillas onto the land, and they sank. And it's very unclear how many people died in that accident. The numbers are either 2 or 20, because I don't think much in the way of newspapers reported Americans doing secret training in the middle of the Gloucestershire countryside. Less so that they died. So it's difficult to find out how many there were. I would certainly be interested if anyone does know any information about that. And in fact, this could be related to a few different events that occur in the building. People have seen American servicemen in several different rooms. There's one story that's told that these servicemen who drowned in the lake were brought to the old game larder, which is now nicknamed the mortuary because of that, and that's why they're still seen. Now, this photo that you can see on the screen here was taken by a friend of mine, Jason Thomas. And this was at the start of an investigation when there was virtually no one in the building. It was him and the lady you can see on the far right who's just poking through the doorway. And this is the first floor. So she was looking over a drop that's into the room below. And what there wasn't was a large black figure standing behind her. Jason didn't see that at all, and wasn't until he was looking through his photos that this was present. I've spent some time looking at this as well, and if you fiddle with the different contrast settings and brightness settings and fiddle with the different color levels, you can actually find that the top half of the figure has a transparency to it. That means that you can see the frame of the window through the figure, which almost seems completely black, but not quite. Now, the stance of the figure could indicate that is a military bearing, perhaps, though it's really hard to work out what's going on the right-hand side with the odd lump and wiggly leg. Maybe a member of the Ministry of Silly Walks. So after the war, the estate was bought by a timber company, who then extensively deforested it for selling it on again because they'd taken everything they needed, and they eventually sold off the remaining bits of the estate in lots. In the 80s, there was reported satanic rituals, which there's always reported satanic rituals in any building that's empty for a while. And part of the estate was bought by the National Trust, which is good. Stopped it being chopped down. And eventually then bought and managed now by the Woodchester Mansion Trust, which is fantastic. They do some great work there, training stonemasons to fix stone places. Now, I wanted to cover a couple of things I picked up over the years, and one was from an investigation that was conducted there in 2012. There were a number of people throughout the building. The video I'm about to play was filmed in the cellar, where there were some people conducting a Ouija board experiment, and there were still people in the ground floor above the cellar and in the upper floors above that. Now, if I play the video, it's an audio one, so I'm going to mute it for a little bit.
Feel free to come forward to the board, gather our energies to help you move the glass. And move the glass towards my voice to let us know you're here and willing to talk to us. We'd like to make contact and talk to anyone. What the hell is that? What's that? We'd like to make contact and talk to anyone. Feel free to come.
So that noise was heard by everyone in the building, from the cellar all the way to the people in the attic floors. It was so loud that the guy who runs the Southern Ghost Society thought someone had fallen through one of the open doorways and it was just crashing towards the ground. There's no explanation for it. There was no one present who made that noise, and if it was something outside, it was Sasquatch, maybe. I don't know. It's totally unexplained. And since I've played a few people that video over the years, and some have also said that they've heard very similar howls of pain or anger throughout the building. Later on, we did a number of very small investigations where only 3 people went to them, and on those we were hearing dragging noises in the floor above, knowing full well there's no one else in the building. It's a very interesting place to visit, and if you do, focusing on the audio is generally worthwhile, because there's some very unexplained sounds there, which might not necessarily know you're there. So it's kind of a lucky dip sometimes. Now, the last piece of investigation footage I wanted to cover was a later investigation, start of last year, in fact. And I was investigating the place with a very varied group of investigators with lots of different techniques. We're very lucky to have had Kev Kerr there, who's absolutely familiar with the mansion, so it was very helpful to tap onto his knowledge. And we were conducting an experiment in the cellar, which we were using a number of environmental triggers that I've built over the years, which are based on data logging, some of which the data spikes and anomalies came from Woodchester. We had once had a massive magnetic energy spike which occurred just in the cellar and no other floors, which led me to making bits of kit which would then look for that pattern of magnetic change. But the piece of devices on the floor look for changes in air pressure. So one of the things I picked up over the years is sudden variations in the air pressure, which then don't match the rest of the environment. They don't match the data loggers I leave outside. And then these devices warn you when it's picked up on that very localized fluctuation of air pressure. And I'd lined them up. I put 5 of them out in this room, as I'd done on several different investigations, knowing that this seems to work in that cellar room. And during that, I laid them out and called out to the environment. This one on the left means yes. This one next to it means mostly yes. This one in the middle means I don't know. The next one is mostly no. And the end one is no, which I find is a much finer way of doing this means yes, that means no. Because if you ask a question and the answer is not quite no, if you say, do you live here? And they don't actually live there, they just visit there or work there, then they'll say no, they didn't live there, and you move on from the location. So I find it's quite useful to have that granularity when using equipment for communication. So I'm going to just play this clip so you can see a little bit of this in action.
Is there someone in this room? Is there someone in this room specifically you want to talk to? Is it safe to switch up the communication method? No. So.
Lauren. Inspiration.
Ooh, almost.
That's not my name.
Now that's a very, very short clip because I didn't want to bore you too much. But yeah, that whole session lasted about 20 to 30 minutes, back and forth, getting very instant results and reactions to questions, and it would go completely dead when we stopped conversing. Fascinating experience, and one I always go back there and try. So I hope that was interesting. Hope that wasn't too dull. I try not to be too dull with the history aspects of it, but I find it's important to know about a place before you start to investigate there, because if you're going to do any experimentation with calling out or Singapore style playing of music, etc., then you need to have a bit of a target. You can't go in blind. And I think this is my opinion, I think a lot of focus tends to be on the Lee family when you go there. And as I said right at the start, how could that be if they didn't really live there? They loved the place, but they didn't leave much of an impression. Yet Spring Park had years and years of occupation with a lot more people there and a lot more stories. So a lot of these urban legends or possible hauntings could come from that period. So when I go there, I try more focusing on that era and tend to get much better results than when I'm trying to talk to Willie Lee. Okay, with that, I'm about finished on the presentation. I not been looking at the chat for any
excellent
questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Andy. That was, as a location that I'm completely unfamiliar with, that was a fascinating dive into that. And I can see that Karen Besant mentioned there in the chat that it's the place that she's done numerous investigations at. So it's good to have someone who's been there numerous times also have a bit of a perspective too. And I might get her to come on and have a bit of a chat with you guys in a minute. A place like this, that must be absolutely huge in size. I mean, so it's clearly had a variety of different uses over time, as you mentioned. One of the questions I did put in the chat is, when you've got a location that's been used for a variety of different purposes over the years, it must create, if we hold the suspension of disbelief that ghosts and such exist and they have some ability to communicate with us, what do you think that there must be a difficulty in assessing what perhaps generation might be talking to you through those processes? Are there things like music and smells that come from different eras of use in locations like this? Are they the kind of stories that I heard there? Are there different layers to hauntings in these places?
You brought it up there, actually. There's one series of experiments which I conduct all over the place, especially if a place has 1,000 years of history. How do you know where to even start? And I always take an audio recorder to every location, which has got periods of music from every century. And and I split that into military and civilian and also now religious, because what I try to do is see if I can get any response, any trigger, any kind of change in environment or the way that people are kind of feeling suddenly based on these different musical things. And sometimes you can get very specific. So forts, for example, I'll take along lots of different regimental marches. And there are some where you could sit there and you can play 20 different regiments. And if you go to this one regiment, you'll always get responses. I mean, always is quite a strong word, but a very high probability. Let's say that instead. Yeah, I quite like that for kind of feeling it out, because that's kind of one constant across the centuries. People quite often like music.
Yeah, it's true. People always want to be entertained. People always want to have the discussion of the environment of music or instruments, as it were. So actually that as a trigger actually is a really, really great idea. I guess if you've created, do you have a music library that you use to take with you? Do you just play it on an audio player and then await responses? How do you do that?
Yeah, so it's literally a library of different eras. I've scoured all over the place to try and find different centuries and eras and styles of music, and then have it on an MP3 player, which I plug a speaker in, and I'll tend to play a short piece of it and then stop. And then see if we get a reaction. Because sometimes in stopping, that causes a reaction. Because someone's been listening to it and go, oh, I've not heard that in 200 years. That's lovely. And you stop and you go, oh, well, start. So I'll go, do you want me to start again? So it's a good way of maybe even getting a bit of interaction that way.
Interesting. That's really good. I really like that.
Like musical chairs. But
No, that's really fascinating, actually. That's a really good concept. As an investigative method, that's actually a great idea. That's really good. I'm really glad you do that.
If anyone wants a copy of that library, just let me know. Happy to share it for other people to try the same experiment.
Yeah, that'd be really good. I was just looking here. We've got like 30 folks here who I'm pretty sure many of us may well do investigations on a regular basis. Pretty sure they might tap you up for some stuff. I'm aware that you obviously got your website, SCIRE. SCIREtech.co.uk. Is that how the best way they can get in contact with you?
That's correct. On there, it shows all the things that I've made over the years, and also has lots of videos to really kind of explain why I've done something. I never make anything unless I can see value in it, and certainly I would never sell anything unless I use it and I think it's got some purpose in investigating in it, and it tells you something, and it's not just beeping for the sake of beeping. So yeah, sciretech.co.uk is the place to go if you want to. I put a lot of news on there as well, what I'm up to and where I'm going.
So there's no
old school blog.
There's no cat balls on there then.
There is no cat balls on there whatsoever. All K2s. Caroline would be glad to hear.
Absolutely. Mike, do you want to just jump into this conversation, share your thoughts?
Well, that was meticulous investigation. I didn't think that was boring at any point. But then I am a historian, Andy, so maybe I'm suited. No, I could tell that was very smooth movement through the centuries, and in each point you were illustrating some engagement with it. It was excellent, really taking a lot away from that. Thank you very much.
Tickled your history bone?
Oh, yes, thoroughly. Vibrating away. And made me think as well about the whole movement. The very first example you gave about the was it somersaulting, a little entity, and I put a question there about, well, this is just to everybody really in some extent, to what extent are some ghosts quite agile, or because we usually think of the ghost as a fairly static thing, don't we, when people see it, or maybe gliding at best, but these kind of movements, have you heard of any other things that are like that?
Well, one very common thing that people report is the speed that they see these anomalies moving at, especially like a shadow. I'm not sure if that's because they've turned their head and they're perceiving it in a different way, but the speed behind some of these movements are unusual. There's also those sort of things really catch me, because that anomaly in itself might tell you something about what you're seeing. So if you're seeing something running at a different speed, or your perception is slower than the thing that's moving, perhaps, but I don't think I've heard mentioned the way of other somersaults. I did once read a story about a ghost they saw walking his hands. I'm sure that counts.
That is unnerving and good.
That is creepy, isn't it?
Yeah, yes, that's pushing things again, and that's fascinating. Because I just think of Spring-Heeled Jack as this kind of acrobatic being, but there's something in there.
I love Spring-Heeled Jack. We definitely need to have a catch up at some point.
Yeah, he's a right character. Not that I know him personally, of course, but yes. There's some interesting commentary then about chariots and carts. So educating in the comments section, let alone the talk. Karen Besant mentions the Canadian soldier on the top floor and a part of a creature in the cellar, so we're getting other perspectives on this. The duel, wasn't that amazing? That was a fascinating case of how things were settled. Honour.
Yeah, and I've used that particular story a few times there, and it does seem to elicit a response. I'm not sure it's one that's is really brought up often. I think, as an historian, I like to go down some foxhole, rabbit holes, and using some of the lesser known things tends to be a lot more useful than the stuff that you just find on their website.
Isn't that amazing? You mentioned that at the end of the talk about the family being prioritized usually, and once again makes you think, are the ghosts themselves bored of being the constant point of contact? You're going in with something refreshing, and this history is so complex and layered. That really is encouraging people to look for the smaller events.
Yeah, I imagine the same thing as well. If someone's been there for 300 years and every time that someone turns up, they just want to talk to William Lee, and then that guy's sitting there going, he's not here, I'm here, do you want to talk to me?
Any people have passed through getting ignored.
Yeah, there's 60 people here and none of them are William Lee. Who do you want to speak to?
Yeah, those American soldiers like to have their moment, don't they?
I'd love to know more about them. And as Karen said when we saw each other on Saturday as well, I think, there's talk of a Canadian as well there. I think when we went to the village, I think they have a war memorial there about people who died. And I'm interested to find out, maybe that's where we might be able to find more information, because maybe normally it's the people in the village who've died go on the memorial. But I wonder if it's maybe not just the people from the village.
Yeah. It's such potential for investigations there, as you mentioned. Unlikely that some obvious sources might have it, but maybe others will reveal it. And Karen also mentions a German POW as well being heard. There have 2 reports. So, yeah, we get quite an international variety.
Yeah, I'm going to try some German when I go next now. That's a great thing.
You get spoons.
Yeah, it's great to see so many examples as well, like the photographs and the sounds you brought. And hearing Karen's comments as well, like the woman in the cell on the first floor of the bathroom. There's a whole host of beings there. There's a question from Kristian: with disembodied sounds, do you think it's a temporal thing, like an actual being, or an echo of the dead?
Yeah, I mean that's another one of those anomalies which might give us a clue to what it is, because you'll think, if I've just heard a sound, then there's only 2 options really. Either the air has been vibrated. The air has been fluctuated, so that then my eardrum picks up that fluctuation, and then the inner bones then move it to the brain, etc. So that means something physical has happened in the world and moved that air, so you can pick it up. And if it hasn't, then that means your brain itself has ignored the ear, and you're just picking it up directly inside your head. And if we can figure out that part, then we'll know if there is a physical presence creating noises or not. Because from research, I think it might be a mixture of the 2. And what I might point to in regards to that one is Preston Manor in Brighton, which is a very good place to go for an historian. I'm not sure if you've been or not, but because this mansion was given to the local council in the 1920s when the family died out after the war, and they left everything. So if you go there now, the clothes are there, the bed sheets, the pots, the pans. So it's like a time capsule. And the interaction you get there is very much, I'm just continuing my life here, basically. Kind of like a revenant haunting, using a Harry Price term. And what we kept on recording there on audio was the sound of footsteps down the main staircase. And that claim had been around for 100 years. There's one of the places where we've got records of Victorian seances. They actually built a seance room, which is still there, and they use that to find a skeleton underneath the patio. So it's a place which has been ghost hunted for 100 years. And I was very interested with those footsteps. Were they recording a sound, or were they footsteps moving down the stairs and vibrating the boards? So I wanted to get some geophones, which then I'd put on each stair, and then see if the stairs were moving or it was just recording a sound. And then I found out how much a geophone cost, and then thought, I cannot put a £300 device on every single stair of that staircase just to figure this out. So that's one of the early devices I made, was a vibration sensor, particularly to go on this staircase. And the annoying thing is that on the second time I tried this, we got the recording of 5 steps, but the vibration sensor on the stairs, only the first 2 went off, but that was it. The remaining 3 steps, there was just sound of them, which is sort of frustrating because it kind of proves the physical reality of those stairs moved. But then how then did the remaining 3 steps occur?
A real puzzle, and it's incredible how we can use technology to provide another puzzle and another puzzle.
It's always like that. You get one sliver of an answer and you get a dozen more questions, which then are going to take you a decade to figure out.
The stairway also features in a comment by Paula Vines. I got chased out of the cellar by I have no idea what, but that's only happened once in 20-ish years. I certainly felt a secondary set of footsteps behind me on ascending the wooden staircase. So what is it with stairs and the supernatural, Andy? I always...
And interesting, I've heard that claim a few times. In fact, someone who might be in this chat, actually, that happened to them as well. Weirdly, exactly that thing, that they heard the sound of steps behind them, and we've got that on audio. So I love when you hear from other people who've been in the same location, they've had exactly the same thing happen to them.
Yes, it starts to build up then, doesn't it? There's a question from Rob Gandy here about the music library, which definitely was another thing that struck me as fascinating. I hope we don't get inundated with requests for that, because I'm sure I'd restrain from immediately suggesting, oh, please can tell me that. But then Rob Gandy asks, is there anything that might be called fairy music?
Fairy music. That's interesting. I never thought about that. Might have to get in touch with Kate Ray and see if she's got anything I can stick on my audio player, because if anyone's got it, it'd be her.
Can I explain why I asked the question, which might sound strange? Yeah,
I'm intrigued.
My good friend and Fortune fellow Ryan Sherlow is doing a PhD in Durham on fairy music. And what struck me was that if you're using different types of music to stimulate responses, I was wondering if there was anything like fairy music. That I like the idea. Therefore, maybe Ryan, if he's got something like that, certainly if you've got something on a plate that you could give him, then perhaps he could try that at some famous fairy haunt. I don't know. It's just a wild idea.
It's always worth a go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely interested in that. I struggle to find the older types. Finding like Old English and say Old Cornish, it's quite difficult to do these days. So yeah, that's also very interesting.
I think you've already got a Sasquatch with that recording there. If you want to,
it sounds like it, doesn't it? A very angry one.
That's covered. That was striking. So I mean, there's lots of compliments for fascinating talk as I go through here. There's references to more elements of the house, including Churchill visiting. There's a host of observations. There's a question from Darren Spector here. Do you think the geography of the area could play a role in the manifestation of paranormal phenomena there?
That is a very interesting question, actually, because all the things I do are based on data logging. And one of the things I've been recording is what is the bedrock for each location. And I have found correlations of certain bedrock types which are more likely to get recorded and evidence paranormal events than others. And interestingly, limestone isn't at the top, but all the top ones are water-based in some respects. The volcanic ones, less so. But yeah, I think clay-based is the best opportunity you get with recorded paranormal events. So I definitely think the geography of it, and perhaps how sodden that valley is, might play a part as well. I think there's definitely a lot that needs to be done experimentally with water, but starting off with just recording and finding out what geography is under each location is really good. There's a good resource for that on I think it's a Scottish archive, and it's on my website sciretech.co.uk. There's a section that says links, and on there there's a side-by-side map link, and if you go to them, put in a postcode or a longitude, latitude, you can pick the map type which shows geography and bedrocks, and from that, if you go into a place, you can find out actually specifically what it's built upon. So, and the more people do that and different good locations, the more data we'd get from that. But I do think there is some link, and the information I've got so far definitely proves that.
Very helpful information and insightful. Karen Bessenton notes that one night I was in the bathroom talking about the ladies who flew the planes from the factories straight to the airfields with just a road map. We did an experiment and hit an old bomber and rang the aviation authority the next day. And but nothing passed like that. So yeah, fascinating.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Karen, did you want to share that story?
Oh, yeah. It was years ago. And, you know, I thought I love unsung heroes. And these amazing women flying Lancaster bombers, Hurricanes, Spitfires, with literally a road map to get to the airfields. And we thought we were talking to this woman pilot. I can't remember, so many years ago now. And then, because I grew up with my dad, who did 50 years in radio-controlled model planes and going to all the air shows, this distinct sound of propellers, all bomber propellers, 12:30 at night. So I thought, oh, wonder what it is. So I did ring the aviation authority. I think they were a bit surprised that someone like me asked a question. But they did reply. They said there were no civilian, but the only thing is it could have been the army, and they've got the carrier, because we used to go to Keyhole Airport and watch the army ones come in and land. So, you know, I'm not 100% certain, but there's something magical about Woodchester Mansion.
I'm booking my ticket there as soon as possible, I think, after hearing this today, and opened up something. There's so much. Mary Thomas comments that she was chased up the stairs from the cellar at Woodchester and having a video and an accompanying EVP. So, yeah, that was mentioned by you, Andy, earlier. But, yeah, this is building up, isn't it? The sounds of aircraft. Oof.
In fact, Mary is one of the 3 people we booked the manor for a couple of times. So if you go on a Friday, you can do the small team rate that Chris does. So you can have the entire place to yourself with hardly anyone there, which is definitely the way to do it.
We do about 8 of us when we go. It's perfect to have that place to yourself then.
If you're in one location and you hear anything above you or below you, you think, nope. That's not Chris knocking around. He's sitting in the break room.
Well, I was sold on the Sasquatch. Definitely not alone.
Well, they do have a cryptid there. They have a black cat of Woodchester, which I've not seen yet. You heard it.
Well, there's a suggestion from somebody saying, would ASSAP be able to do an investigation in there again? I don't know what to make of that, Kristian.
Well, dude, I'll put the questions to the people. I'll put it to Norrie, I'll put it to Steve, and see what we can arrange. And actually, you know what? That sounds like a really excellent thing to do. So actually, you know what? I will push them to make sure they make that happen.
That would be great. It would give me an opportunity to get down there, maybe.
Yeah. So my sudden death question: where is Woodchester Mansion? Where is it in the country?
Near Stroud.
Okay.
So Gloucestershire. It's not far from the ancient Ram Inn, actually.
Two for one. Nice.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, a double header.
Yeah, I will put it on the I'll email them tonight, and I'm aware that the one thing I've been pushing this year, perhaps a little more than I should have done, maybe, is to make sure that we put on events this year for 2026 and 2027. Just basically start putting some events out into the public, right? Just whether it be east, north, south, and west, on top of the conference, just like, hey, do we have a competent member who's over there in that area who perhaps just could run, a night in the pub, some kind of event that we've got something going on, and kind of build a network, because there's hundreds of members who've been members of ASSAP. There's hundreds of members who are members of the SPR and the Ghost Club who have an interest in this kind of thing. I mean, across the country, like Danny Robbins is selling out his tour, where are these people? They're out there and they're interested in this stuff. So let's just start putting on some events around the country. So I will nudge them to make sure we perhaps can get Woodchester Mansion on our events list. So at least I can promise to ask.